When you become a woodworker, you start looking around the world and thinking, could I make that out of wood? Tired of this shit. This project is just one of those things. We have these toilet papers in our house that are terrible, and I want to remake them. But I want them, as always, to have multiple uses. So to start out with, I need to make sure that I know the size of the toilet paper that I'll be using to hold. I have these pieces of white oak that I ripped apart, and they're roughly the size I need. They're 3.5 inches wide. I plan on suspending the toilet paper, something like that, and so I want it to stick out a little bit. So I'm gonna do some layout now for the next cuts. I measured out 5-inch little boards, and I'm making 2. Always put your pencil on the line and then bring your measuring tool to it. That way your line doesn't move. Gotta extend my lines. Then we're gonna do angles. These are gonna be our miters on that. I did on both sides. Before I cut the miters, I wanna just trim off this so I have my 5-inch pieces. We're gonna go to the miter saw really quick, trim these 2 off, and then we'll move on to the table saw and cut miters. I dropped my blade down to show me where I'm gonna cut. A lot of saws have a laser like this one or a shadow line. I need to see where the kerf of the blade is gonna touch my wood. You might be wondering why I moved from the miter saw to the table saw to cut miters. And you certainly can do that. You can cut them on a miter saw, but a lot of miter saws have what's called slop. They kind of don't exactly cut on a straight line all the time, especially when you're leaning at an angle. And table saws, especially good ones, don't have a lot of slop. So I prefer cutting my miters here. First step with this is I gotta bring my saw to the full height. Then I'm gonna turn my angle gauge around until it hits 45. So I wanna set the blade just above my material. Then I'm gonna put my miter gauge so I can have accurate repeat cuts. And it'll make the material sit square to the blade. Always check your tools. My miter gauge is on 0. There's the beginnings of our toilet paper holder. I am gonna glue one of these up. Setting up a straight edge to glue against. Now we have some pencil marks, so I wanna get rid of those where possible. I'm gonna flip them over. And then we're gonna put tape. And you really want that tape to hold them as tight as possible. Flip it back over. So make sure you're not pulling it past 90 degrees. We want it just to hold it at 90. We have a little bit of squeeze out in there. I'm gonna wait for the glue to set up, meaning wait the glue to harden just a tiny bit, and then I'll scrape it out. If I scrape it out now, it's gonna smear it all over the place, and we don't want that. Everything looks pretty good. Glue's all dried up. The next step I'm gonna do is totally optional. I'm gonna add splines out of walnut just to make it look a little more elevated. I like mixing my wood species. I'm gonna do a spline on each side, an inch in from each side. All right, we're ready to cut the other side. So that's against So that's the thickness that I need it. We're just trying to get these splines to just a perfect fit. Two. So we have our splines cut. Now we're gonna glue them in. I switched glue to Boss Dog. It dries clear, which I like when you can see it. Just gonna coat the spline. When you put splines in, there's always a lot of squeeze out due to the angle they go in. And so I'm just trying to get rid of as much as I can. The reason why I like splines is I like the way it looks design-wise, but also it creates more strength. All right, so we got our splines in. Now we need to cut them off. We're gonna use a flush trim saw. The key is to keep your finger close to where your blade is cutting the material, but obviously not near the sharp part. Just filling in some holes. Pretty good. So our rabbets came out really nice and clean. Now I have to square these off with a chisel so that I can cut a piece of plywood for the backer that fits that square. We need to sand the front and the back faces of these half boxes. The best way to do that is to glue down a sheet of sandpaper to your workbench. I use double stick tape. Place it down and you do circles or figure eights. These are the numbers for me to cut the backs of these out of plywood. So we got our backs cut out with some gaps around there. It doesn't sit exactly true against. I'm not worried about that because wood moves, so it gives us space. I'm gonna glue these on with some Titebond Thick and Quick. Backs are on. We're gonna sand really quick 220, and then we'll be ready to put some finish on. I'm using a white Scotch-Brite pad. So that's it. This is a great project for beginner woodworkers, and you can get this done quicker than you can take a shit. If you learned something today, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'll catch you on the next one.